What I want to talk about today is not what goes wrong in online learning, is the invisibility of the learner. So what we would like to do is talk to 4 people who are officially enrolled, and we're not going to tell you where they are enrolled because we thought we would not identify any institutions simply because then we can just relax and we're not going to be worried about, oh my God, hope they're not one from ours. So they're not. But they may actually, think about it, they may have enrolled in several institutions. They may not have just done one course online. What I really wanted to start by showing you, I would like to show you some pictures of the people under the data that Lynn gave us. So I'm going to start to show you who these people are, where they actually live in this country, which is some of the data, and what they actually say about the quality of their online experience. And the point I really want to make in this, and it was very much informed by the telephone conversation that we've had, because we actually haven't met before face to face, which is a lot like online learning. And we wanted to make the point that you can't tell who is an online learner. So as you were just asked, if you've ever enrolled in a MOOC online, if you've ever done any study by distance, then you have some experience of what it's like to be an external distance or online student, and they're not all the same. So the message is you can't spot them in a crowd. They're not who you think they are. So who studies externally? What do they think? Where do we meet the standards? And where must we try harder? That's what we're going to ask our students to tell us today, without fear or favour, drawing on their experience so far. Here's another way of looking at the data that Lynn showed you. This is a picture under the numbers. This is organised vertically by age group. Across each of those bands are the minus 25s, the 25 pluses, the 30 pluses, 40 pluses, 50 pluses, 60 pluses. And you can see undergraduate and postgrad. Now I've lumped internal and multimodal in together on the left-hand side. And then the externals are on the right-hand side. And you can see the domestic column there. And you can see the bands. And in fact, if I organise that by gender, you would see more women are studying than men. And that is shown in the data. And what you can see down the other axis is the fields of education. So you can see where the numbers are. But what we do know about the people in the external domestic column is they are a bit older. They are studying part-time, generally, not always. And they are often have other agendas. So that's one way of looking at the data, and they're the percentages of the entire sector. Now that was 2016 data. It's a little out of date, but the idea is there. But it's always good, I think, to try and use a visualisation to make the invisible visible. And here is what I wanted to show you next. There is that map, and every one of those blue dots is a person. Now make that point really clear. This is your cousin, your uncle, your father, your mother. They're not 18. They live all over the country, and they all have a life. So these are our external students. This is 2017 data, and by my reckoning, 2% of them identified as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. 67% of them in 2017 identified as female. 3% were younger than 20 years of age. So don't always assume, by the way, that they are a little older. They may not be. 7%, this gave me great encouragement, were more than 50 years of age. In fact, some were even older than that, older than 60. Wow. 13% said they were born outside Australia. 5% said they had a disability, and 2% identified themselves as having a non-English speaking background. So, I go back to my point. They live in every state and territory, and not necessarily yours. So I know those blue dots, I know which ones are studying with Deakin, and many of them are outside Victoria. Geography is no longer a barrier. It's been an association, but more and more all of us are enrolling students a long way from where our headquarters are. So I keep telling marketing people at Deakin, stop sending tweets out on a long weekend saying, have a great weekend, enjoy the laneways of Melbourne. Because guess what? They're in Darwin. And, you know, that is core business. We've got to be where our students are and not assume they're going to be where we think they are. And also, you know, don't put things on your website if you're a digital business that says, you know, we're open till 5 o'clock. Well, whose time zone? There's 3 hours difference between Perth and here. And of course, we're not even talking about people who live somewhere else in another country. So they don't necessarily live in your state. And even if they're on your campus, they're not necessarily your student. Because what we've encouraged our students to do, the 15,000 fully online students, is go to any campus. You're a taxpayer. You can use EduRoam. You know, there are many campuses around this country. There are many libraries. Use the broadband because yours may not be good. So you can't spot them in a crowd, or I should say you can't spot us in a crowd. You can't spot them in your staff room. I know of at least 3 Deakin staff members who are studying with a competitor university. I've written their names down. No, but they are choosing, they are studying. You can't tell them. And you can't even tell when they're enrolled in another institution. So those are some of my messages, but here's a hunch I have. Why do our online or external students attrit more readily? I think it's because sometimes it's because life, and this predominant age group has different things. But I also suspect, because I've looked really hard at our data, they're often usually doing 1 unit. So when things get tough, they drop that unit. And that means they're not doing anything. They don't go from 3 to 2 units, they go from 1 to 0. Therefore, they're out. What we also suspect is they come back. And they may come back and they may go to a different institution, because the great thing about online learning is they just have to change website. When you're a provider, that's not real great, but if you're not meeting expectations, they will go somewhere else. So don't assume if you're in Tasmania, your students are living in Tasmania. I know you know that. I just thought I'd make it clear. Here's the quilt data, the National Student Experience Survey data. This is rough. Any inaccuracies I take the blame for. What I've done here is benchmark, based on data that I can get hold of. I've lumped the same groups together, external versus internal or multimodal in one group. The other thing I will say about internal and multimodal is they, certainly in my experience at Deakin, they are 75% of our enrolments. They act more and more like the online enrolled students every day. So every student has a digital experience these days. What I did with this, though, was compare percentage agreement on the data indicators in the student experience survey. And if they were 5% different, campus-ish versus online-ish, I'm making some big assumptions here, I either coloured them green or orange. Just a couple of comments. You can see there's a lot of green there. I'd like you to look at the teaching quality one, and before you get too excited about that, have a look at why they were 5% better. Course well structured, the external students, and I keep using that word, said 71% positive, fantastic, it's even better than on campus, but gee, that's a low bar. So I go back to the comment earlier that, you know, people say, well, we have to make online as good as campus, you know, and I go, oh, surely we can do better than that. Because, you know, think back to your own experience. It wasn't all beer and Skittles. Oh, some of it was, but not all of it. So some of those are a bit of a low bar, but you can see where we seem to be disappointing our students. Complex problem solving, teamwork, spoken communication, there's some obvious ones there. Look down at learner engagement, that's the one. I do want to make a comment about this. I know this scale's been revised and we've got what we've got. But sometimes, you know, if you are one of the typical learners who are external, a sense of belonging to your institution, well, I just gave you an instance of how we don't often make people feel that they belong because we think everyone lives in Melbourne. But also discussions, did you work with other students? Did you interact with students out of study? Well, actually, I've got no idea and I really don't care because I'm busy and so on. So the answer to the question is an agreement, it's not a level of satisfaction. We do conflate those things. Did you interact with different students? I don't even know what that question means, but there we are. So, but this group systematically tells us a less positive story. So something's going on there. And interacting with a local student, I don't know what that means. If you are studying online and you live in Alice Springs, I don't know what it means to interact with a local student. But there we are. That's what we have. And the rest of the data is similar. The learning resources, a bit patchy there, bit much the same. And the student support. This group of students, the external students, seem to be a lot more positive. I wonder, career advisors available if you're already a working adult. Maybe that's a halo effect. Maybe you don't need that career advice so much. So, all I wanted to do with that is to set the scene about digging under those numbers to find out what's really going on, and this is where I stop. So here we have our students: Sadie, Simon, Daniel, Ashley. We won't identify, because you've forgotten already, where anyone ever came from or where they've had their experience. We have a range of disciplines. They're all unique, just like you and me. So we're asking them to tell us today, and we want you to interact. We want your questions. We want your comments. Let's have a chance to talk. Where are we doing okay? Where do we have to try harder? And what I've listed there is just a summary of 5 of the standards, which I thought were particularly important for the external or online learner. And they are around participation and attainment, learning environments, teaching, institutional quality assurance and course approvals and so on. But also the last one, I made a point of, do we actually deliver what we market to you? Let's get down to it. We offer you something, do we deliver? So, moving along now to our students. Why don't we start with Sadie and simply ask you to introduce yourselves, give us like the elevator pitch introduction about your experience, and then we'll kick off with more interaction from the audience.
So my name is Sadie Hackenberg. I'm a Wiradjuri woman from New South Wales, and I've recently completed my PhD in Indigenous Oral History. So my PhD was a really interesting experience. I did it full-time and part-time, and I actually took my PhD to 3 different universities following my supervisor, or 3 different institutions, apologies. And what that meant is that I had a different experience at each institution. Every couple of years I was inundated with different forms, different ways of being as a student, different pots of money, because each institution of course has a different kind of funding allocation for a graduate student. And I really found this an interesting perspective from my point, because I could actually see, well, how does the system work? What is actually best practice and what isn't? But how to be as an Indigenous student online. And we were just looking at the statistics and seeing that 2% of online students are Indigenous students, which is a little bit higher than the overall engagement of Indigenous students in higher education. And I think that really fits in with us and our cultural obligations and our community obligations. And so I really found that the online environment for me, I didn't live in the same state as the institutions I was enrolled in. And so I found the online environment for me suited me as an individual. However, not necessarily as a student, because I found that I was doing a PhD before compulsory coursework. And so I had no cohort at all during my enrolment. And so it was a very individual experience. And I think that that's something that I really took with me and I try to change within my position, is giving students who are really enrolled in that individual experience a cohort where they can belong.
Thank you so much. And next we have...
Hello, my name's Simon Burnett. My history with online study is I have studied online at 2 different institutions. At my current institution, I initially began my course studying part-time on campus. Then when a bulk of the units in my course were moved to online, I decided to go completely online and may as well cut out the middleman, which ended up being very helpful because it meant I was able to take a work opportunity interstate and move for work. So a lot of something that I think gets missed out in a lot of the discourse around online learning is it's not always a decision that the student makes because of things going on in the student's life. A lot of the time, especially these days, due to cost-saving measures or due to universities desiring to, seeing that growing online market, seeing that, 22% of current students versus 42% of future students seeking to learn online, moving a lot of their courses online, and therefore a lot of students who are moving to online study are doing so because that's a decision made by the university and not by them. And so you come up with a different sort of dynamic of strengths and weaknesses of online study because of that. Not sure what else should go into the Cliff's Notes, so I reckon I might leave it there and pass it on, and then if there's any further questions, we'll be doing that for a bit.
Thank you, Simon. Please.
Hi, my name is Daniel. Like Beverley said, I hope you have very short memories about where I'm from. I have a very good feeling there are DBCs from my university here. So my experience, like Simon's, I've been to 2 different institutions studying online. Oh, sorry, not studying online, 2 different institutions. So my first one, I got in straight from high school, a very elite institution. It was like my dream course, studying law. I was also, however, working quite a few days per week. I couldn't really afford, I didn't get a scholarship or anything like that. I found very soon that at that particular institution, working a few days a week would not be possible. I found that none of my lectures were recorded online or submitted online. I would have to go to tutorials, compulsory attendance. I was just a wreck after a few months, I just couldn't do it. So I transferred to another institution. This is somewhere where I was able to study online. All my lectures are online. I don't have to go to compulsory tutorials or anything like that. And I've just found the experience to be pretty much a model of what online learning should be. I think there's still room for improvement. I guess what's been said about attrition rates and blended learning being the most preferred mode instead of being purely online or purely in person is absolutely spot on. I think ultimately there are still really big advantages in being on campus and going and having that face-to-face experience. And that's something I've really tried to get more of in my experience. And I have actually dropped down from purely full-time work to a bit more flexible so I can go on campus when I need to. But I found that, my experience has been really beneficial. The flexibility, being able to have those online experiences while also getting as much from the face-to-face as possible has been invaluable. And I'd be happy to share that as we go on.
Thank you, Daniel. Ashley.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ashley Piziakis. My story is a little bit different to the 3 that came before me. I came to university for the first time as a 35-year-old. The 10 years prior to that, I'd spent travelling. I started 2 tour companies in Spain and realised I had some gaps in my knowledge. So I moved back to Australia, decided I wanted to study, and decided to commence that. It's been an incredible experience, filling those gaps in knowledge. Definitely some frustrations in there as well. But it's really cool being part of something that's growing, and I'm so fascinated with this group of people that's in the room. I had no idea this was a thing. All of you are here and working so hard to try and make sure people like me are having an incredible experience. Anthony, thank you very much for asking that question before for me. I was really interested to see who had actually engaged in, I'll say, real online learning, not like you have to do an e-learning thing for your job, for workplace health and safety type stuff, but done an actual course. And I think if people are to engage in that more, these people in the room, your perspective on it might change significantly. And I think that would be really, really valuable for everyone in the room.
Fabulous, thank you. I heard some themes, which I'll just recap, and I'm sure you heard others. I heard about the solitary nature. That was a PhD, and I would actually say most PhDs might be quite solitary. The cost shifting, and there's some idea that online is cheap. I know that my university would say this is a very expensive thing to do. It's not cheap at all, and it costs a great deal of money to keep the whole thing running and service it properly, along with the standards that Michael shared with us this morning. Online is a deficit when universities do go from a campus offer to, oh no, I have to do this online. There is this thing in our heads where this is somehow not as good. The flexibility it offers, which is a great positive for lifestyle, being able to work and so on. And the idea also that this is an experience and that it's an experience that can be enthralling. Also, just picking up on Ashley's last point, that we can't assume our students come to us with no knowledge, having started a couple of companies or two. That's, pretty amazing. Fantastic. Excellent. Now, I know you will have a lot of questions, but I suggest we rip the Band-Aid off and ask our students to tell us, where do we need to try harder around teaching, assessment, feedback, anything? We might as well hear these things, and others in the room will have experience. And we had a bit of a practice on the phone. So in the nicest possible way, if you could give us constructive feedback about how we could do better. Any order you like. All right? So, Sadie.
So I've just come from the TEXA for Students forum that's occurring across town. And one of the things that really resonated with the students is, how do we grow our own? How do we incorporate the student voice within the creation of curriculum? And I find that that's actually really essential for an online environment. So I run an Indigenous enabling program, and my students are online students. And the reason why I feel it's becoming more and more successful is because I'm an online student. And so I know where they are at. And I think that question of, are you currently doing online study, or is there a course or a MOOC that you can take that will allow you to experience that environment, to really wade in that pool of what it's like to not have any physical contact with your colleagues or with your teachers, to actually have an online environment that is just as interactive as any classroom. And I think it's really important to communicate with our students, not only the students that are enrolled, but the students that have just left that program, to how we can constantly improve. And I feel, and I will be quiet, I feel that one of the main things too as well is that I think we're a bit stagnant. So a lot of the courses that we're in as online students are courses that were written for a cohort 5 years ago. And I think that we change a lot as a cohort. We're almost teaching students who grew up with a smartphone. And so we really need to work within the environment and within the cohort of students that are currently in that classroom. And I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think some of what you touched on with regards to the stagnancy of it kind of goes to what I was hoping to talk about, which is the accountability of it on both sides of the internet connection, on both the university and the learner, the institute and the learner side of the connection. That online, not all of the time, in fact, only some of the time, but in instances where it's been implemented, whether it be poorly or cheaply, or just without a whole lot of research or knowledge into what makes good online learning, it can be quite a lackluster system, which will tend to lead to a lot of those attrition rates. One of the things you mentioned in response to universities may be going online to save money, and pointing out that a lot of universities, such as your own, pour a lot of money into it, is firstly that pouring money doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the best results depending on where that money is being spent, but also the fact that a lot of universities have now had online learning systems for decades. It's 2018 at this point. The internet is like 30 odd years old. I'm probably a little bit off on that, but online learning systems at universities are not a new thing. And when you take a quite a new or quite recently developed course, and then try and fit that into the old online system, and then just try and find and replace everything in the course outline and fit it into more online related terms, you're going to get a bit of a lackluster experience as far as the students are concerned, and often as far as the lecturers and tutors are concerned. So I think that accountability, that listening to student voices, to staff voices, is something that needs to be taken up by a number of institutions if they want the online learning to be something that is taken seriously and is appreciated by the people doing it.
Point taken. Thank you.
I have an observation more than an area for improvement. It seems like in institutions, and this includes primary and secondary schools, you've got people that are incredibly passionate, like Beverley here, and are working phenomenally hard to produce great results and to get people through the door, or whatever we come through as online students, and to give us an incredible experience. And there's those people that have been in the organisation for 614 years. They like the way they did it 614 years ago, and they don't want to do it the way you do it in 2018. And I feel so incredibly frustrated for Beverley, and I'm guessing everyone in this room, those people in your organisations that drag it back, that have a student like me going, it's 2018, not 614 years ago. Why, what, how, who, when, what? So yeah, that's a stumbling block. That's an obstacle for everyone in this room, I'm certain. I don't have a solution for it, but it's when whatever your institution is overcomes that, things are going to improve at an incredible rate, and yeah, learning outcomes will be excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think in agreement with that and what Simon was saying about accountability, just, I guess in my experiences, especially with the first institution I went to, kind of overcoming that feeling like it's just so difficult to actually be heard as a student who isn't on campus every single day, or isn't there at all in some cases. With the institution I'm at now as well, just in terms of getting the same level of interaction as online students, as offline students, as Sadie was saying. I find that a specific example is response times for getting answers on discussion boards and emails and things like that. When we've seen that, like the stats that were cited by, I think it was a speaker from the ICMS before, where blended learning is the one that is growing and is the most valued. Students clearly value having the opportunity to be treated like an on-campus student. And so when you put a question up on a discussion board or through an email, and you're waiting several days, up to a week, to get a response back, whereas your on-campus colleagues or friends are getting a response back the same day, it can just feel like you're not valued in the same way. And when you're an online student and you are more often than not juggling other commitments, full-time work, family, things like that, and you've got an exam or an assessment coming up, having to wait that long can be a very stressful experience. I think that must be some part of the way towards the attrition rates as well, with there being such a discrepancy between online students and blended and on campus. I think, and this, the accountability goes both ways. It's up to us as online students to seek that out as well. But I think there definitely are improvements that could be made with making sure there are improved response times, improved responsiveness from staff and academics. Like Ashley said, I don't have a response to that either, how we can fix it. I think it's a very, very complex issue, but it probably goes a long way towards resourcing and things like that. But I think as an online student, it would help a lot to feel more valued and feel like I'm getting, value for my money and for my time. If I maybe got quicker responses and more opportunities to communicate really one-on-one with academics and staff.
So I'd like to follow up with a question to all of us. In 2018, do you know of any platform, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, that has a discussion board where you go, where fun goes to die, basically? So I'd like to respond to the LMS comment. It has been the bane of my life, quite frankly. I know where new platforms are coming out all the time, new vendors and so on, but I find them very much yesterday's idea. with a few bells and whistles here and there. So I would like to acknowledge your comment that I think there are two major blockages to us enabling people to learn the way they live, the way we live. We live on our phones, we interact, it's prompt, and so on. And it's not all like buying a book on Amazon, I understand. The two blockers for me are the systems that we either have or change to. They are very expensive to change to, but that's a different story. That's lots of things are expensive. But are they fit for purpose? Or is the LMS of today and maybe tomorrow still designed to film the play? You know what I mean by film the play? It's just like, here's your captured lecture and there you go, and here's your discussion board. There must be better that we can do. I know some of the big global platforms, Coursera, edX, FutureLearn, are trying to break that mould, and others. And I just hope some of the newer LMSs that are coming out are starting to break that mould as well. The second one is the mindset of the teaching staff. I'd also say the mindset of the service support staff, because our experience, whether we like it or not, is grounded in that. Most people who are teaching online didn't learn that way themselves. So it's not native for most people. Most people who are providing support services to online or external students probably did not learn that way themselves either. And it's it may be easy for me to say, don't put up a picture of the Melbourne laneways, please, but you have to be able to see yourself from your students' viewpoint. So acknowledge, it's difficult to be heard. I also heard that. And we really do want a prompt response. Yeah. And I do hear that from campus students as well. But of course, we can never be fast enough these days as well, to be fair. Yeah. And our teaching staff and our support staff, they also do get to go home occasionally and have a life. So in the 24/7 digital economy, we need to know how to figure that out without killing people as well, because we're not going to do that. Are there any questions or comments from the floor?
Hi, I'm Jess Roberts. I'm at Marcus Oldham College at the moment, but I have experience in a few different universities as a student and as a balanced or unbalanced lecturer, however you like to see that, and also now in a predominantly teaching spot. I think a lot of the comments that you guys have made are very fair, and just as a response from someone who has been on the other side of the fence, we make those comments as well, and I think that maybe one of the areas that could be strengthened is educator support. So there's a lot of emphasis in our universities on marketing and getting students in, and then when the students are in, helping them learn skills like writing or referencing, things like that. But there's not always a lot of time and space for lecturers to probably do the development and have the time to respond adequately. So just from the other side of the fence, I don't think that this is you guys are alone in your perceptions. As a fairly young lecturer, I've had a lot of issues with finding enough space to give the students what I think they deserve.
Fair point. Yes, please.
I totally agree. I've seen it from the lecturer or professor's standpoint, and you'll have an absurd number of students, and it'll be leading up to assignment time, and you'll have 412 people send you emails saying that my dog died yesterday, I can't submit it, and it's not physically possible for you to respond to all of this. And this isn't your fault, and it's not my fault because my dog died. The institution needs to step up and go, all right, we need to give you the support you need to be able to service these clients. That's absolutely fair, and yeah, I'll acknowledge that, yeah.
Yeah, also, I was quite worried that what I was saying would come off as an attack, and that's absolutely not how I meant it. Yes, there are absolutely some teachers who don't take online learning seriously, but there are absolutely even more students who don't take online learning seriously. I've also delivered a course online, and also had the similar sort of nightmares where a student has left everything to the last minute, and if I'm going to be completely honest, I've been that student once. In my defence, I got hit by a car and it was after the date. But, this is, I think a lot of universities see, we had that picture up on the slide before of the absurdly overcrowded lecture theatre. And I think that, again, there's some universities, not all, but some universities will see, a quick fix to that ridiculous number of students in a physical space is we can put this ridiculous number of students in an online space where they've got more room to breathe, and suddenly the lecturer has far less room to breathe. That's what I was trying to get with the accountability is like on a lot of perspectives, you can't just put the blame on the lecturers. A lot of students find ourselves doing, or vice versa. It's got to be at an institutional level also.
Something that I've observed, experienced through my online learning is that, and I imagine it's the same for all of the institutions here, if you're proactive, there's a phenomenal amount of support out there. But the challenge is you need to be proactive. Like I refer to myself as a grown-up. I'm a grown-up at university, and there are 18-year-olds doing the same course as me, and often very confused and very lost, and I'm online and there's no one to hold my hand and there's no one to look in the eye and talk to and tell me it'll be okay. And that's really, really hard for them. Whereas me, being a grown-up, I don't think that's good enough. I'm going to go find an answer or find someone that can help me or find out what I'm doing wrong to be able to rectify this situation. So,
following on the theme that you've been sharing, what's one thing we could do differently in 2019 that would make your life easier as a student and help you succeed?
Every person in your institution enroll in one of your online subjects. Mm-hmm. Every single person. And I'm going to include the cleaner, I'm going to include your admin staff, every single person, so they can relate to what the students are experiencing. Because if you've never done it, you've delivered it, your perspective as a teacher or as admin staff, you're so disconnected from what the reality is for this person. And for me, running a business, working part-time, 1-year-old daughter, studying full-time, things are full, and having to call up multiple times to check something about a subject or waiting 4 days to get a response to an email in 2018 isn't good enough. And when I say that on the phone, or when I say that to whoever it may be, I'm sure there's a roll of the eyes going, okay, boo-hoo, whatever. Whereas when you actually live it yourself, you kind of go, oh, wait, we can do that better. We can change that process to make it more efficient. So that would be my biggest number one thing.
Great response. Any others?
May I? I also think that it's embracing their technology. So, and I know we were talking about technology, we were talking about platforms, but I think there are lots of different new techniques that can be put into our online platforms that we don't necessarily use. And I think all staff training as well, because I think that our staff are given very little resources to be able to go to a conference or do some upskilling, and they're giving up their research time or their time for their job, the money that could go to that, they'd have to give up for training to be able to improve their online performance. And I think that institutions should really prioritise that. I think that it should be something that is a core part of somebody's job so that they understand what it's like to run these systems. I think that that's really important, and I think that needs to come out. I know we're all about finance, but I think that needs to come out of a different bucket of money. I think that needs to come out of, this is our core business, this is where our students are, so we need to make sure that all of our staff are up to date within this realm.
Yeah, not to reiterate too much of what the other guys have said, but I think it's spot on, just development for the academics, for especially like sessional staff. I think that was another thing that was cited before in the what needs to improve, development for sessional and casual staff. As being someone who, I sit on the student union at my university as an online student representative, I think one of the most common things is like from talking to lecturers and tutors, and a lot of them are my age and really young and just starting out, there is this feeling like you're, I guess, kind of pushed to do all those the corporate things and the research and stuff like that, but you also have to deal with, as we said before, hundreds of emails and hundreds of messages, and I think it must be such an overwhelming experience And I think that was a wonderful idea, saying that, you know, it would be great to make staff and academics enrol in those units, because I think seeing that from the inside and experiencing that, like the night before an assessment, that cold sweat where it's like, I'm just not going to get an answer in time, just got to take the plunge. I think that would really, really help to kind of level the divide between students and staff, especially in terms of online learning.
Hi, Elizabeth Moore, Dean of the AIM Business School. I want to say that I did my Master of Commercial Law online through Deakin, and it was a fantastic experience. So thank you, Deakin.
The check's in the mail.
Thank you. But I'm also fortunate to be on the review panel for the AQF. So I wanted to, and we are looking at micro-credentials, I wanted to ask these fabulous people what they thought of micro-credentials, and would that be something that you would find useful?
I think it's awesome. Jumping into a 3-year degree, I've got a 1-year-old daughter, and I was speaking with people at my table before, wondering about what her future of learning is going to look like. And I'm just trying to decide what I'm going to do at the completion of my degree, and I want to do further study, but I also don't know how valuable an MBA is. I don't know how valuable these other things will be that is me signing on for a year and a half or whatever duration of time. So me wanting to focus on specific skills and go, I have this expertise, and then finally maybe that does turn into an MBA where I can put together these micro-credentials to actually form something that's recognised, I think is excellent. And I think for the coming generations where everyone's attention span lasts about 4 seconds, it's going to be more and more important to be able to give everyone their attendance award, a clap, a graduation after every second week, so you achieved something. That might be a bit patronising, but it's kind of true, where people need to be ticking off their achievements at a different interval now than what it used to be. And part of my experience as a mature student at uni, often it feels antiquated. The way things are run, the way it all goes, it definitely feels like I'm taking the online side of things. That's very modern. It seems like something that was developed 50 years ago and would have been great then, but there's an enormous area for development and improvement.
Very quickly, micro-credentials on the AQF is like enabling on the AQF. It's a little bit scary from my end, but I think it's really important because I think that we need to take micro-credentialing seriously. I think that it'll allow us not to need to give so much recognition for prior learning, because I think we're going down a little bit of a slippery slope. We have students that are doing masters that have only got four or 8 courses of an undergraduate degree, just to try to pump them through to enable them to get those credentials. And so I think that if we have the micro-credentialing, we're working more within that online environment. We're working more with what the student needs instead of what they need for their position in the outside world, not necessarily needing to be at a university for 3 or 10 years.
Just really quickly, I completely agree. I think micro-credentialing is an awesome opportunity. I'll just give one brief example. I have a friend who goes to the same institution as me. She is on her 3rd degree at the moment, the previous 2 uncompleted. She's only my age. We're in an age where, and like, she's not a flake or anything. She's not out of her mind. She's just like, you get to this point where you're so indecisive about whether the degree that you're doing is actually going to steer you in the right direction, but you shouldn't have to enroll in a completely new degree halfway through. I think having the opportunity to do micro-credentialing means that you don't have to completely overhaul your course. It just gives you that flexibility. I think the institution that I'm at has been really good at that, but there's always room for improvement.
Hi, Elise Mason, TEL Education Specialist from University of Wollongong. I just wanted to ask if you might elaborate a little bit more with some specific examples, perhaps one of your experience that hasn't necessarily been so great. I know there's been talk about courses perhaps that were designed maybe for cohorts 5 years ago or even worse, 614. Could you share some experiences of what those actual experiences were, and perhaps then maybe something that you've experienced that was hitting your expectation more, like more specific example?
When you're an online student, it's very anonymous, and my name's Ashley, which is often a girl's name. So I've experienced with unit chairs or whoever it may be, where there's an assumption that I'm firstly a woman and secondly I'm 19. And the way that they've engaged with me has just blown my mind, patronising. Sorry, Beverley. I couldn't imagine it happening if they were looking at my face, but it just blew me away. I'm an expert in particular things and you're an expert in that thing I'm learning. But when you're an online student, it's also anonymous, and it's, we need to make sure.
Okay, point taken, thank you.
Yep. To give a specific example, the online learning system that the institute at which I used to study used, and according to people who I spoke to in preparation for this, still uses, was introduced at the end of 2007. It's only had cosmetic changes since then. Now, to put that in internet years, at that time, MySpace was bigger than Facebook in Australia, which some people might not even remember. If this is the case, and if, for example, a student who graduated from the masters that I'm doing 5 years ago, who I spoke to about a particular issue with the online system, they said, "Oh, everybody in my cohort complained about that too, and we all included it in our surveys that the university sent around at the end of the semester." And I'm 100% certain that everybody in my cohort is going to be saying the same thing in those surveys. If the university isn't listening to students or to lecturers or to whoever else involved when there are complaints about the online learning system, then why would we be expected to engage with it?
I suppose more of the negative side is something I actually wanted to bring up anyway, and that is, I know we mentioned them, but that is the almost invisible student of the staff member that is a student. They don't, and I found this myself as well, you can't walk through the halls of an institution without being the staff member. You don't really get an opportunity to be a student. You're on a student online. But also particularly for support staff, and I think this is something we really need to take into consideration as a sector. Our support staff, like my Indigenous support staff, support themselves. The only people they can go to are themselves or their colleagues. And you don't necessarily want the person in the room next door to you knowing your private business, even if you're friendly in the office. And I think that that's something we really need to take into consideration, is that though a lot of the staff, particularly the support staff, don't have a lot of support on campus if they go in or ring up, because they're actually contacting their colleagues. And so we need to really, I think, and that's what I found a little bit difficult. One of the things that I found really fantastic is I am a fellowship junkie. I love a good fellowship. And when I went on my Fulbright, it didn't affect my study at all because I was an online student. I didn't need to put in any extra forms. I mean, the institution knew about it, of course, but it allows the freedom to be able to explore your reality outside of campus. And I think that's a really important thing for us as students in our day and age.
I've been broadly very satisfied, I think, as I've said, with my experience. But I would say, as having experienced, I guess, all three, completely on-campus study, completely off-campus for a bit, and then kind of trying to get as much blended learning as possible. And as we've seen, that is where the highest level of satisfaction is, a combination of the two. I would say just there could be more work done to really break down that barrier between blended learning and fully online. Even though we might say that, you know, there's no barrier between the two these days. Everyone's a blended online learning student or something like that. I think, like, an example was, because I was working full-time and I was completely online, and then I really did want to start going to class when I could, whenever I had a day off or something like that. I had to jump through about 10 different hoops. I had to call 20 different staff members to find out where my class was being held. Just because I was an online student, I was told, no, you are a an online student. I won't use the term that's used at this university. But yeah, you are an online student. You do not have the right to attend a physical class for this unit, which just made no sense to me. Really. I was later told that this was not the advice I should have been given. It was just a particular member of faculty who felt this way. I'm not sure why. We pay the exact same money to, get the same service. But I just think, and I have found it improved just in the past, 12 months, 2 years. But I still think in terms of really kind of bridging that gap between the two, because ultimately students are happiest when they have that flexibility of being able to have a consultation with a lecturer or a tutor if they are in the area. If you're in Melbourne and your university is in Melbourne, yes, you're an online student, but what's to stop you from going in?
I think we're going to wrap up now, if you don't mind. Before I thank the students, I'd like to make some closing comments and just themes that have come out. You might have seen on your table, I handed out a little bookmark this morning. We haven't made this mandatory at Deakin, but we have a little free open course on FutureLearn on transforming digital learning, how to do this better. We designed it so our own staff can be educated and re-educated about what it means. It's open now, you can join, or it's going to open again in January, and there are many hundreds of people around the world in there, practitioners, so you're most welcome to join that. I'll finish by saying great education is never easy, so don't feel disheartened. That's my experience of being an educator for many years. No matter how hard you try, you always disappoint someone and you can always improve. But I think we're giving a red-hot go. I'll also say that in post-bachelor education and bachelor education, we are working with students as partners, and that it is about taking joint responsibility for a great educational experience. Nevertheless, colleagues, I think the digital economy is upon us. And we're now at a tipping point, I think, where the return to learn to earn populace will be coming back to do shorter, probably online, probably very skills-based, but highly warranted courses. And I don't think this is going to be an option. I do think this will be the new normal, and we need to keep working hard to get it right for everybody, staff, students, the wider community. So on your behalf, may I thank Sadie, Simon, Daniel and Ashley. Thank you.